Welcome back, everybody. Got another marker to look at today. Today we are going to take a look at my Palmer's Super Stalker. Now let me tell you, this is an interesting marker. This is a Sheridan-based stock class pump, so this is one of those brass markers you may or may not have heard about. It's very different from something like a Phantom, which is a Nelson-based pump where everything is all in one line. The barrel, the hammer, the bolt, it's all in one line. Here, this is a stacked tube design, so we have the valve and the hammer in the lower tube, the bolt and the barrel in the middle tube, and then in this example it has a third tube, which is the feed tube where the paintballs go. Some other markers that have a similar design to this are things like the Sheridan PGP, the PMI-1, and the P68 stock class. We're going to take a look at some of those in future videos. This marker is a little bit weird as far as a Palmer's marker, and specifically in terms of super stalkers, because it's kind of a hybrid design between a more traditional Sheridan marker and the Palmer's super stalker design. The first thing is that there's a big difference in the valve system between a Sheridan and a Palmer's marker. Even though the overall layout is the same, the Palmer's design is much longer, so you typically have a wider space between the rear of the marker and the ASA. So this ASA on a typical Palmer Super Stalker is much further forward. For whatever reason on this one, it's set in the traditional place where you might find it on a Sheridan that's been modified to have a vertical ASA. The other big difference between this marker and your typical Super Stalker is the feed tube. This has a 15-ish paintball horizontal feed tube that is attached to the top of the barrel. Your typical Super Stalker has what's called a cram and jam feed, which means you take a 10-round tube and jam it right in there and the tube stays in the feed. This marker obviously doesn't have that. It has kind of an integrated feed tube that you can feed from either end. Typical of Palmer's markers, this marker has wedgets, which are small indentations in the barrel, which you may or may not be able to see right there, that little indentation. That is just a little bump that goes a little bit into the barrel to prevent the paintballs from rolling through the barrel, because typically these brass markers have larger diameter barrels than the small paint you see these days. So you have these little indentations, and that prevents rollouts, and they work really well. The modified feed tube is slotted so that you can see how many paintballs you have left, which is a very nice feature that I really like. And one very nice touch here is we have a ball detent that is in the style of a Palmer's Blazer. So it's a very effective ball detent that prevents double feed. So we have the wedgets to prevent rollouts, we have the Blazer style detent to prevent double feed. So those two things combined make misfeeds and rollouts very unlikely for this marker. As is typical for Palmer's markers, we have nickel plating here. You can see the nickel plating where the pump has rubbed away the black powder coat, but the black powder coat is not typical of Palmer's markers, but it is an option you can get. So whoever originally had this marker put together went for the black powder coat, which I really like because I like black for my markers. Probably the most unique feature of this marker is the frame. This is called a Surgison K frame. It's designed to be like a revolver type frame. It has very, very comfortable rubber grips. I find it extremely ergonomic. It does set the grip back a little bit, so it increases the length of the marker, whereas your normal 45 or Sheridan grip would be a little bit further forward underneath the bottom tube. This is actually set so the grip is mostly behind the bottom tube. It's a very well-designed piece of equipment. It has an integrated RVA, which is a very nice touch. And as I said, I find this extremely comfortable and ergonomic, especially in terms of the very high angle of it. It allows you to play very tight without putting too much strain on your wrist. Going back to the feed tube up here, you can have it feed from the back, as is typical of a Sheridan. This one has the extended feed plug with a leash, so you're not going to lose the feed plug when you remove it on the field. But I find removing and replacing the plug somewhat cumbersome, so I modified this to have a Phantom feed gate on the front. I had to shave it down to make it fit, but it's attached with some super glue and a couple of set screws, so it's not going anywhere on there. And that works really well. I can now load from the front instead of having to remove the cap from the rear. This setup is one of two ways I use this marker. Pretty typical with the vertical 13.3K with my stock glass tank cover and my tubes in there. The alternative is the ICD lever changer. If I'm playing a stock class game, I'll just go with the 12-gram changer in there. You could use a bucket changer, of course, which is one of the ways you typically see Super Stalkers. I really prefer the ICD lever whenever I'm using 12 grams, so that's what I use vertically in place of the air tank. So typically, when I'm using this marker, this is the setup I'm using, again, unless I'm using the 12-gram changer. Despite the overall length of this marker, it's actually fairly ergonomic. because I can get in really tight, much tighter than you expect with something this length. That's thanks in part to the angle of the K-frame. And the balance is really nice. With the tank in the middle, it sets the balance point right between your two hands, so it's a very, very ergonomic, comfortable setup. Also typical for Sheridan-based markers is an unported barrel, which you can see right here. It's 11 inches long, and it is extremely loud, which is one of my favorite features of this marker. When you shoot this marker, everybody knows exactly which marker it is, which I think is really fun. So compared to something like a CCI Phantom, this marker is heavier, it's louder, it's less efficient, it's just overall more cumbersome. So why would you use something like this compared to a CCI Phantom? There are two major answers. One is ergonomically, some people really like the stack tube design compared to the inline design of a Nelson-based pump. And the second one, and the one that really does it for me, is that a marker like this is super fun. It just has a very different feel to it, plus the extremely loud sound signature. It's really fun running around with this marker. It's not so heavy, because again, you're using a small tank, no big tank, no hopper, so it's not so heavy that it's going to inhibit your movement. It's just a different feel compared to something like a Phantom or another Nelson-based marker. So if you want something like this, getting them new for Palmers, depending on the setup, I don't know the prices right now. It's probably somewhere in the $350 to $500 range. I honestly haven't looked in a long time, but that's my guess. But getting something like a Palmer Super Stalker used, the basic ones, as long as it's in working condition, are probably going to be between $250 and $300. I've seen them go for much less than that in need of repair in the $200 range. And these are fairly simple to repair, with the exception of removing the vertical ASA, which can be very cumbersome. Other than that, the Sheridan and Palmer internals are fairly easy to deal with. You do need a specific Sheridan valve tool to deal with those, so it's not as user-friendly as some other markers. But as long as you have the tool to remove the internals, it's very, very simple to take them apart, replace the O-rings as necessary, and replace the parts. So if you are looking for something like this, finding one that is in need of repair is actually not a bad way to go. You could definitely save some money going that route. So that is the Super Stalker from Palmer's Pursuit Shop. It is a Sheridan-based stock class paintball marker with a vertical ASA, so you can use 12 grams or a tank and make it modified stock class. It's up to you. It is loud, heavy, not super efficient, but it is super fun to play with, and I really, really, really enjoy using this marker. It has a really special feel to it. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time when we're going to talk about the Sheridan PGP, this marker's much smaller and older cousin.